Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome back. We are on session 6 of 47, and it has been excellent. We've got our next speaker here, and this is A. Wesley Jones, and he is the customer success manager out of Rapid Deploy, and he's going to be doing a session called Loss in the Comm Center, Lessons in Leadership. Thank you very much, my friend, for being here and for this session, and take it away.
Thanks, Ricardo. Good afternoon, everybody. Just as we start, I do want to just give a little warning. Like Ricardo's Imagine Listening session, there could be some triggers in here. We are going to take a little bit of a roller coaster ride and talk about some sensitive topics, including suicide. And so I just want to throw that out there before we start. Hope I don't lose anybody, but absolutely understand if that's the case. So quick history of me. I have 26 years, or had 26 years in the PSAP. I started as a part-time dispatcher, went full-time training officer, supervisor, and the last 11 years as a PSAP director. In late February, I left the Comm Center and I started a job with Rapid Deploy as a customer success manager. So I am absolutely loving it. I do miss the 911 center, but I absolutely love what I'm doing. Still getting to visit customers and that we have that are using our incredible products, and so it's been a fun journey so far. Currently, I'm living in upstate New York. We'll talk a little bit about that, but it's T-minus 25 days, and I will actually be moving to the North Carolina area. For those who do know me, you know that I have been in a long-distance relationship with Melanie Neal, who is the executive director of Guilford Metro 911 in Greensboro, North Carolina. And the impetus for all of the change is that we are going to drop the long distance portion of the relationship and just be in one area. So really looking forward to that, obviously. So let's get started. Little background that's helpful to give you some perspective as we move into this. I was with the Chenango County Sheriff's Office, and it was the 911 center under the Sheriff's Office, located right in the heart of central New York. We were a rural county in upstate New York, population just under 50,000 people, about 910 square miles, pretty large county, go corner to corner, take you a little over an hour and a half or so, across all of our rolling hills. And one other note, I was lied to all my life. I was told that we had more cows than people, but I actually looked it up a few years ago, and that is not true. So at one time it was, back when agriculture and the dairy industry were a lot more prevalent in upstate New York, but issues with farming, not just here, but all across the U.S. And so at one time that was quite a bit higher. Our area is famous for Chobani. That Chobani yogurt was founded right here in Chenango County. The gentleman in the top photo in the middle is Hamdi Ulukaya. He is the founder and CEO of Chobani. I bring it up because he's actually a phenomenal leader, and you can kind of Google his name if you like it, and you will see some very good things that he has done. He bought a defunct yogurt factory here in our county, didn't even know how to make yogurt, decided that the best thing to do was to paint the walls because that's what he could do. And in the course of 5 years, he developed his Greek yogurt product, took it to the masses, and went from a $0 revenue, 5-employee company to, at that time, in 5 years, well over 2,000 people in a $1 billion company. So if you want to learn about not just leadership, but entrepreneurship in America from Turkish immigrant. Look him up on Google. It's or on the internet. It's pretty interesting. Also, Pepto-Bismol was made in our area. Norwegian Pharmaceuticals many years ago started that. It was later sold to Procter and Gamble Pharmaceuticals, and like many manufacturing jobs, unfortunately, here in upstate New York, they ended up being moved out to another state. But we do claim Pepto-Bismol because that was made here. Kind of picturesque area here in upstate New York. One of my stress reliefs is photography. These are some photos I've taken of the area. And the bottom left one is one of my favorite photos. However, I will be honest, I am done with the cold and the snow. And so I will enjoy future winters where I am only watching pictures on Facebook or wherever. So that's, but that's kind of my stress relief. Some photos I took of the area here that we live. This is the dispatch center that I worked at. We moved into this facility in 2005. Slightly different now. There's some status boards and some things like that, but I use this photo because it gave you a really good observation of the entire center, including there's four main console positions, a supervisor QA type position over against the wall, and on the right side behind the glass was my office where I could overlook the dispatch center. So Chenango County 911 we have a total staff of 16. At the time it was actually 14. We had 9 full-time floor dispatchers. We have an extra position, or they have an extra position now, and 4 part-time dispatchers, and then 1 addressing coordinator who was a supervisor, and then the chief dispatcher position. Everybody worked 8-hour shifts, 3 shifts, A, B, and C. If there was overtime, it was split to 12-hour shifts. So somebody stayed 4 over, somebody came in 4 early. Unless it was a real emergency, nobody worked 16-hour shifts. And so there was 2 to 3 dispatchers or call takers working per shift. So the first thing I'm going to do is, the first part of this presentation is, I'm going to talk about some loss in the comm center. These were a series of events that happened which greatly impacted our center and our personnel. I'm dividing it into 2 specific categories, one incident and then a series of incidents that happened the following year. The first one was we had a suicide of an employee. This was a new employee just off from field training. This happened in February of 2016. He had started, the incident happened in the summer of 2016. He had started in February of 16, just off from field training. He was having some issues kind of putting everything together, not specifically completely out of the norm. Everybody has those issues. We had done some remedial training on specific issues, and we were continuing to work with him. But he was working the floor at that time, working an overnight shift. This was somebody who was starting a second career in their 50s, and so it was a little bit different than most of the people that we hire. But he was a fairly quiet gentleman, but got along with everybody. Had a nice personality. Was easy to get along with. So this incident happened on July 1st of 2016. I was actually off this day. I was leading up into the July 4th holiday. I was in town, but I had taken the day off. I was building a patio outside my house, and was going that morning to get gravel, crushed stone from the gravel bed, and bring it back. So I had done that. Got up first thing in the morning, went down to the gravel bed, got my truck loaded up with crushed stone, brought it back, trying to get it unloaded as quickly as I can before it gets too hot. It was a pretty warm day. And I'm about halfway through this when I hear dispatch across my fire pager for a EMS standby for police activity on a particular road that I was quite familiar with. The road had quite a few people that I actually knew lived on it. I knew this employee lived on it, although actually that wasn't my initial thought. My former boss, who was the fire coordinator, lived on this road, and several of his in-laws also had property in that same area. So that's actually what I was thinking about. But I didn't think a whole lot about it because it wasn't specific. So I didn't know exactly where they were going. I just kind of kept going and doing what I was doing. A few minutes later, my phone rings, and it was the supervisor on duty at the dispatch center. The supervisor, due to vacations and things like that, was working the console that day. And immediately I knew that something wasn't good. And supervisor told me that had a possible suicide call, or they had a suicide call, and they believed it was our employee. The employee had called on a cell phone called 911, and he just said, basically, please, you need to dispatch police and EMS to this address for a suicide. The Calltaker, who was a supervisor, attempted to engage him in conversation, but nothing else was said. He set the cell phone down, and there was an open line. Because he was so new, they didn't recognize the number. You know, we were in a really small agency. Everybody knew everybody. After a period of time, you would know people's cell phones. You would know their address by heart, things like that. And he was just too new for that to have happened. They searched the address. They searched all of our CAD data, and actually his name didn't come up with it at all. He was just had never made any contact with our office at any point. Had never called 911 in his private life, and so there was no record of him. They were able to trace the address back to his wife's name, and they ended up searching, I believe, as I recall, some DMV records, and kind of was able then to possibly associate his name to that, and that's when they thought that was what had happened. This was kind of a rural area. The whole county is rural, but this was outside a city or village, and so it was a period of time before the patrol arrived on the scene. The patrol pulls into the driveway, and the wife meets them, and the deputy says, you know, we're here for a reported suicide. And she said, you know, I'm sorry, you got the wrong address, just here with my husband and somebody else. And shortly after that point, there was a gunshot that came across from the back of the residence. One of the only saving graces of all of this was that the cell phone clearly had some type of noise cancellation. And although the phone was out there with him at that time, the gunshot was not actually heard across the phone. The deputy, at this point, after I had received the initial call, I had gone inside where I had my radio scanner, and I could hear both police, fire, and EMS. And I heard the deputy call immediately for EMS to expedite to the scene. A short time later, I got a call from the supervisor back telling me, that they had called on the phone and confirmed what I suspected. At that point, I'm sweaty, I'm hot, I'm dirty. I rushed and took a shower and changed. I don't even remember doing that, but I got done and I made a phone call to our patrol lieutenant. And this is one of the mistakes that I made initially was I asked him whether he thought I should come up to the scene or to go to the office. And in retrospect, now that I've learned quite a few things in leadership over the past few years, I realize I should have never even have had to ask that question. The answer to that was I should have gone to the dispatch center. Ultimately, that's what I did do for a variety of reasons. Not making excuses, but over the years, it was fairly common because of my role in fire and EMS and emergency management that I also did, that I would go to the scene of incidents, even as the 911 director, if there was a standoff or there was a major incident, homicide, whatever, it was something that I would very typically go to the scene of. And so I think that was part of it. But more importantly, it was some lack of leadership on my part that I had to question that at that point. One of the things we did learn over time, very short period of time, was that there was no note left. And so we have no idea why. We don't know if it was some of the stressors of the job. We do know that he had just lost a sister-in-law in the past few weeks, and we later learned that they were pretty close. But, was it that? Was it stressors from the job? Was it a combination of that? Was it something else that we have no idea? We don't know. We'll never know. I did, as I said, go into the comm center. One of the kind of the second mistake that I made was I did sit down with the two people that were working. I was talking to them. Of course they said they were fine, but we talked some, and obviously they were fine for the situation, but they weren't fine. And one of the second mistakes I made was I didn't take the supervisor who had taken the call off the dispatch console and tried to relieve him for a period of time. One of the things in our center is, because of our limited staffing, you don't have the ability during a stressful or after a stressful incident to just get up and walk away. There's only one other person covering all of the phone calls, radio traffic, police, fire, EMS, everything. It's not right. It's I pushed for more people all the time so that we could have that ability, not just for that, but for meal breaks and for bathroom breaks and in the simple stuff. But we didn't have that ability. And unfortunately, partly because of that, partly again due to my leadership not being where I wanted it to be, I never thought of that. I did do some things right. Not trying to beat myself up. I'm trying to share my experiences so that people can relate to them. And God forbid, if something else were to happen, somebody else has this knowledge in order to, have it in the back of their mind. One of the things I did do was I did personally call every single one of our employees and let them know so they heard it from me directly. Also, a couple of days later, we brought in a critical stress debriefing team. It was completely voluntary. There were several people, including some who needed it, including myself, who took advantage, and that went really well. Beyond all of the obvious things, it was a very difficult time trying to schedule around vacations, and now we had a shift that was open. At that time, again, there was 9 people. Anytime a shift was open, either had to be covered by a part-timer or that was automatic overtime. So on those split shifts where we, had somebody stay 4 hours later and somebody come in 4 hours early, it's like 42 shifts a month right off the bat. So immediately 42 shifts opened up on top of what we were coming into the July 4th weekend and everything else. So that was extremely difficult. We had people who just, grieving, stressed out, and myself and the supervisor, worked a ton trying to cover those shifts and trying to do the right thing. And, we got through it, but it was certainly difficult. Again, because there was some questions as to why and whether what the family thought or whatnot. We wanted to obviously pay our respects. We wanted to offer up an honor guard. I ended up liaisoning that with the funeral home who worked with the family, and they were very appreciative of us doing that. And so we did that for the calling hours and the funeral, and a number of our personnel participated in that. Just one other small note, and this was just kind of an awkward thing on my part. This is an employee who's no longer with us, and we had to get back uniforms, badge, ID, things like that. I ended up having an acquaintance, which was his stepdaughter, who I was able to kind of do work with and get back, the items. As it turned out, they didn't want them there, so they were, gladly willing to turn them over. The first go around, there were a couple things missing, and I had to go back again, but we got it taken care of. So that was just kind of an awkward situation. A lot more I could go into this, but I kind of, pressed for time, and so I'll move on to the next one. In 2017, so you fast forward about 15 months, we had, in a 2-month period, 3 employees who lost a total of 5 relatives. All 3 of them lost a parent or a step-parent. One of them was performing CPR on his father while on the phone with a coworker from his shift. And one of the employees, who was a younger employee, he lost a father, a great aunt, and a grandmother in that 2-month period. His father died of a young age ended up contracting a disease and died in a relatively short period of time. I and many others have never been to funeral home that many times in such a short period of time, and I hope I never have to do that again. Kind of the biggest issue out of this, beyond the obvious grief and trying to support employees and things like that, was basically covering our operations every day. We had employees who had just had terrible tragedy, you came back from bereavement leave and had to work overtime shifts because that was the only option. And everybody came together. There was, some frustration, but everybody understood, what the problem was. Everybody offered up as much time as they could, days off, things like that, to come in and work. And we ended up getting through it. But that was another very difficult period of time, and one of those things where you're like, is this ever going to end? So what do all these have in common? There's no playbook for this. There's no SOP. There's no manual. There's no policy or procedure. Everything you do in these situations is based on your leadership. You can have a line of duty death policy, but that only tells you how to put together a funeral or things like that. What it doesn't tell you is how to manage your people through a crisis. And it's not just managers, it's people, it's supervisors, it can be unspoken leaders in the comm center, but it's how you manage your people through a crisis. If you've never taken a leadership class, this is kind of leadership 101. You have managers and you have leaders. On the left side there, your managers are skill-based, rational thinkers. They kind of tell people what to do, things like that. In many cases, in order to be a good leader, you also have to be a good manager. But the problem is not every manager is a leader. And managers aren't necessarily bad people. There's just bad managers. But people don't follow and get inspired by managers. They follow and get inspired by leaders. So for me, I was an aspiring leader, but I wasn't where I wanted to be. And I knew that, but the problem was I didn't know exactly how to get there, to be honest. I kind of think that that's where I was in the course of the kind of scale from management to leadership at kind of the times of this. Jack Welch, who was the CEO of GE, said, "Before you're a leader, success is all about growing yourself. When you become a leader, success is all about growing others." I wasn't intentionally trying to grow myself. I thought that the way to lead was be the best manager that I could. If I knew as much about the 911 center as I could, if I was technically astute and all of those things, I could be a good leader. And I tried to listen. I told people that I had an open door policy, which I did. My door was open 99.9% of the time. And people took advantage of that. The problem that I had was I didn't go and talk to people. I waited for them to come and see me. That was one of the problems. So I had some leadership qualities, but I wasn't spending enough time growing others. So how do you get there? First off, for me, I had to figure out what the roadblock was that was keeping me from being the leader that I wanted to be. It took a while. I can be a really slow learner, but I figured out eventually that it was me. And that seems simple enough, but it's a lot more complicated than that because you have to figure out why that is. I was the problem, not just me, but more importantly, my personal characteristics. Between about 2017 and 2019, I managed to figure out a lot of things about myself. It took a little while. I told you I was a slow learner. But once I started to understand things that honestly I had refused to acknowledge, it started falling into place for me. In 2016, I met a guy named Adam Tim, who is now one of my coworkers at Rapid Deploy, which is awesome. But Adam, I think most people on here will know, was a national speaker on the 911 circuit. He ran a company called the Healthy Dispatcher. And he became one of the people that changed my life, both personally and professionally. I saw him speak in 2016, and I knew right away that he was someone I needed to know. I knew why, but I also wasn't fully listening either. I really only heard what I wanted to hear that day. He talked about some things that I was actually doing right, and so kind of patted myself on the back. Good job. I wrote down some things that he said I should be doing that I knew I wasn't doing. But at the end of the session, I closed the notepad, and honestly, I never opened it again. Thankfully, though, I knew what I had written down. It wasn't a huge surprise, and it kept bugging me and gnawing at me. The problem was I still was in this kind of wall where I just didn't have the ability to overcome some of my own personal issues. From that, I knew that I needed some more leadership. And in 2017, I decided to enroll in NAPCO's Registered Public Safety Leader Program. It was a great program. I learned a lot from it. I did some of the things that were recommended. There's some exercises all through the program. But there was still this roadblock, and I didn't really move the needle that much. In the midst of all this, in 2017, my marriage was swirling down the drain. And it was just a real mental drain all the way into 2018. But later in 2018, some monumental things happened that really changed my life, changed my outlook, and ended up helping me finally figure some things out. In 2018, I went to the APCO Las Vegas conference for the RPL graduation, and it was there that I ended up meeting somebody by the name of Melanie, who I mentioned earlier, who is the director at Guilford Metro in Greensboro. And we became friends, and over the course of a few months, decided to start a relationship. We didn't know how it was going to work. It's 600 miles currently between us. And again, in 25 days, it will be 0, thankfully. But I mention her because if you have seen her speak before, back in February, she did a presentation for the Denise Amber Lee Foundation conference, and she's just a phenomenal leader. And I don't say it, even if I didn't know her other than having seen her that day, she's just a phenomenal leader. And just, I've learned so much about myself and in leadership just by being in a relationship with her. The second one was in November of that year. My friend Tracy Eldridge, who I'm sure everybody on here knows, was doing a program in Syracuse, New York, which was about an hour from me, about PTSD. And she was doing it on a Monday. We went up over several people were involved in this. We went up over the weekend, and I met a guy named Carl Waggett. Carl is from Ontario, Canada. He was a firefighter, and he runs a podcast called PTSD Bunker Gear for Your Brain. And it's geared towards all first responders, military, and dispatchers. That's why I included first responders. And he talks about his own PTSD struggles. And so I knew Tracy's story pretty well. Tracy and I, at this point, had been friends for several years. I had met her back in 2015 when she was still in the Comm Center. She ended up leaving and going into the private sector, and we just continued to be friends. And I was familiar with her story. It honestly didn't resonate deeply with me. Her triggers are certain people, sights, smells, things like that. And I had no connection to that. I was there, and so I was an understanding friend, but I didn't completely understand what she was going through. Her and Carl did this program, and it was actually a morning session and then repeated in the afternoon. And like I said, I had met Carl over the weekend. We didn't get into any stuff. It was just, we had a good time. We actually crashed a wedding at the hotel that we all stayed at. They had cupcakes. I really like cupcakes, and so we crashed this wedding. But on Monday they did this program, and Tracy started out and did her story, which I was pretty familiar with at this point. And then Carl got into his story. And Carl's story is a little bit different. He has triggers, but they're not related to specific incidents. And he just talked, there was one particular story that I remember he talked about in which he was, he said we would go out on a really bad call. It might be a child that died or whatever. And an hour later, they're back at the firehouse, and they're, you kind of put it behind you and you're yucking it up and you're moving on to the next thing. And basically it was compartmentalizing everything that he did and then burying it. And I realized at that moment that that's exactly what I would do. As I told you, I've been in the PSAP for 26 years. I got a lot of stories, mostly funny stories about stupid people, things like that. In those 26 years, I probably couldn't tell you about 20 phone calls that I took. 20. I've taken thousands of phone calls. I was a master at compartmentalizing things. I would put it in a box buried as deep as I could and try to walk away from it. The problem was, it was just a big heaping pile of crap at this point, and it doesn't go away. So I did this morning session. We had lunch, and then they did the second session, and I heard the same story again. And it was at that point that I knew I needed some help. So I made an appointment to see a counselor. I went and saw this doctor who was actually quite the quack. He was a very interesting character. I actually wanted to leave after about 3 sessions, but I stuck it out, and I'm glad I did, because as much of an odd duck as he was, as it turned out, he knew exactly what was wrong with me. And more importantly, he was able to help me figure that out. And he wasn't there to help me become a better leader. He was there to help me become a better person. And once I became a better person, I was able to become a better leader. This is a book that he gave me. I'm not into reading books all that much. I've read the internet from front to back, but I don't read books that much. But he gave me this book and he said, you need to read this. And I have absolutely no idea who Dr. Robert A. Glover is. But that guy knows who I am. He knows me to a T. I took this book home. I sat down and I read the first chapter, and I was honestly freaked out because there literally wasn't a word in that first chapter that didn't apply to me. And as I read the rest of the book, I had encouragement because there was a lot of things that it recommended to do as changes in your life and things like that I had already done. But I also knew there was still a lot of work. This book was released in 2003, and I'll tell you, my life would be a whole lot less complicated if I had known about it about 15 years earlier. But again, like I said, not too much into reading books, so I never found it. One of the biggest things I thought was that to be a leader, I needed to be a nice guy. And I needed to try to accommodate people, even when they crossed boundaries or they were taking advantage of you. Even if they weren't taking advantage of you consciously, they're taking advantage of you subconsciously because they know all about you and how you think and how you work. So the book doesn't say to become a jerk. What it says is you need to set boundaries and communicate. Both things I didn't do. It's okay to say no. There's rules. People need to follow them. Those were the things that I hadn't done in my life, both personally and professionally. There's a lot more to it. I don't have time to go into it all, but the basic takeaway is this, not just from the book, but from my time in counseling, my personal character flaws, which were mainly social anxiety, some PTSD, and being Mr. Nice Guy, they were what was preventing me from becoming an effective leader. I can't be a leader if I can't talk to people, or only talk to people about things that I want to talk about. You can't resolve conflict if you just compartmentalize things and never resolve the actual issues and just bury it away. As I said, Melanie is right near the top of that leadership scale. And one of the things I learned from her, she's the nicest, most genuine person you'll ever meet. But she also doesn't put up with any crap, trust me. She'll tell you where to go. And there's boundaries, and if you cross them, there's consequences. And it turns out that's the way it should be. And so I was able to start resolving my issues by having difficult conversations I didn't want to have. And that's how I started to overcome these issues and become not just a better person, but then a better leader. So leadership training in our field. Like I said, there's a lot more that I could go through, but we'd be here all afternoon. We have other speakers coming up, but I'll leave you with this. A good start for any leadership is taking all of the courses that you can. Watch videos, go to conferences, get on Dare to Be Great sessions, whatever you can. There's a lot of free stuff out there. But there's also other opportunities out there. For instance, these two programs, APCO's RPL and NINA's Center Management Certification Program. There are scholarships at both the state and national level for these organizations to help you pay for them. But sometimes you just need to invest in yourself. I paid for the RPL all by myself. I actually ended up getting a scholarship, but I had to front the money. And actually, in the end, as I said, I used it to fund my trip to Las Vegas for the APCO conference and the RPL graduation. And thankfully I did, because as I told you, I met this wonderful woman there who's part of this whole process that changed my life. So that's that's it in a nutshell. But my message is, again, there's no playbook. There's no manual. There's no policy or procedure. I pray to God none of you will have to go through some of the things that we did, but they happen, and they'll happen some other place. And I hope through my personal experiences that I've shared today, I can help you handle some similar situations better than I did. A final thought. You probably didn't notice, but I never said the word regret. And I don't have regrets in life. Actually, I have one. I never learned how to play the drums. I wanted to play the drums, but I have no rhythm. I have no musical talent, but I really wanted to play the drums. And it's more of a symbolic regret. And the reason is I don't have regrets because regrets just tear you down. If it's something you can't fix and take back, you have to live with the consequences. You make amends if you can, but you have to move on. But you can also do something positive. So for instance, I'm here today to present this program to try and help other people become better leaders. Hopefully I've done something here today to help someone else from making the same mistakes that I did. And that's how you can move on instead of belaboring your regrets. There's my contact information. You can reach me at that email address. If you're on LinkedIn, please connect with me. I like to share a lot of industry stuff and some of the great things we're doing at Rapid Deploy. I'm also in Ricardo's Discord channel and things like that. So that's where you can find me. But thank you very much. And I've appreciated this opportunity to be here today.
Thank you, man. This was amazing. Very powerful session. Everyone in the comments just vibing with you, knowing what's going on. That this was it's such powerful and for you to share, to be able to share this. And if we can, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and drop this off the screen really quick.
Okay.
And if you can just
give me 1 second. Okay.
If you can minimize your PowerPoint, just look into the comments there.
Okay. Let me exit out of that.
Because everyone who is here right now, his PowerPoint was covering his monitors and such. He was unable to see what's here, but there's a lot of love here, man, in the comments, just going through it. And Jesus, you got me choked up as well. Thank you for sharing this. When it was a little while ago, I remember that you had sent me a message saying, I kind of have an idea for the session. I thought this is something that needs to be shared, something needs to be told, and you were all about doing it. I can't thank you enough for doing this session and sharing with everyone, because this is how we learn, right? We learn from each other.
Absolutely.
And this is, like I said, if you get a chance to go back in there and just read some of what everyone has said, a lot of agreements, a lot of people just saying, just very brave, courageous, everything to be able to share this and being this open. Not a lot of people are willing to open up and show this side or share some of these stories, and it's amazing. Thank you so very much for that.
Thank you, Ricardo. I appreciate it. We talked about this, and I just felt that I had something that I could offer, and appreciate you for allowing me to do it.
Thank you again. And for everyone who is here, like Wes was saying, he is part of the in the community as well, to share any information or for further contact, for people to further connect and all. And we will be heading to the next session that's going to be coming up. This session is going to be coming up at 3 p.m. Eastern Time, and this will be with Edie DeVilbus of Shape Good Habits, and she's going to be doing Even Stronger 911. So we will see you in the next one, and thank you again, man, very
Thanks,
very
brother.
much for this session.